Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show that cuts through the noise to get you to the core of what's happening in the world. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a relationship that, well, it feels like it's redefining global power. The evolving strategic cooperation between Russia and China. We see headlines constantly, but what's really driving this transformation? And what are these surprising implications that you should know about?
That's a critical question, yeah. Because while there's plenty of evidence showing significant shifts in international relations, especially, concerning major powers,
Right.
what's often missing is a clear framework, a sort of coherent interpretation to truly make sense of it all. How do we measure and understand this profound change?
That's precisely our mission today. We're going to unpack this evolving strategic cooperation between Russia and China, focusing on the period since 2014.
Okay.
We'll look at the empirical evidence of these profound changes, dig into what's truly driving their collaboration, and analyze its surprising implications across military, economic, tech, and multilateral spheres.
Right.
And ultimately, we'll consider what all of this means for you and the broader international landscape. So let's get started.
Sounds good. And to really grasp where this relationship stands today, we have to acknowledge its history, which has often been quite fraught.
Definitely.
After the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949, there was a period of heavy reliance on Soviet military aid. But by the 1960s, a deep strategic distrust emerged.
Ah, yes, the Sino-Soviet split. That was major.
Exactly, famously leading to that split.
And those 1969 border clashes were particularly intense, weren't they? I mean, that period even saw China strategically reaching out to the United States.
Yeah, as a way to balance the Soviet Union. For a long time, that legacy of kind of betrayals and a lack of mutual affinity, it really seemed to inhibit any deeper, lasting cooperation.
It absolutely did, which makes the events of 2014 so pivotal.
It does. Russia's annexation of Crimea, maybe unexpectedly for some, served as a massive catalyst. Well, this moment provided additional, really powerful incentives for both countries to deepen military-industrial cooperation. It fundamentally reshaped their relationship.
That's quite a turning point. So what exactly are the underlying drivers? What brought these two nations with such a, complicated past to this point of rapprochement?
Well, multiple things. My sense is a big piece of it is a shared worldview.
Okay.
This desire to see an end to the unipolar post-Cold War world order. That shared strategic outlook is certainly foundational.
And beyond that, external pressures.
Definitely. External pressures, particularly from the U.S.-led West, have undeniably pushed them closer together.
Right.
For China, it's primarily about keeping its strategic rear safe, as it navigates its complex rivalry with the United States. This pressure was instrumental in shifting its view of Russia from maybe a foe, or at least a competitor, to a necessary partner.
And for Russia, what's the calculus there, from Putin's perspective?
Well, from Putin's perspective, international instability can actually be beneficial. The more chaotic the global environment, the more opportunities Russia finds to assert its influence. His strategic thinking, often described as realist, meaning, prioritizing power and security above all, also deeply emphasizes military strength as the most crucial factor in global affairs.
But it's not just about grand geopolitics, is it? Domestic concerns must play a huge role.
Oh, absolutely. Both countries share a common goal: regime survival.
For their authoritarian systems.
Exactly. We see this with Putin's realist approach, which some sources connect to the kleptocracy and mafia state characteristics of his system, heavily influenced by the Siloviki, the former security officials.
And in China.
In China, this translates into a top-down driven process of socialization and propaganda. They even leverage a powerful joint narrative related to World War II, portraying a shared history of struggle against external aggression. It's about solidifying internal support for their respective systems.
Okay, so all of this leads us to the big question everyone debates. Are Russia and China actually forming a military alliance? Or is it something else entirely? The perspectives seem really quite conflicting.
They are. Simon Sardzian did a useful overview back in 2020. You have some experts like Sergei Karaganov who go as far as to say it's an alliance already.
Wow, okay. That's quite definitive.
Yeah. But then, on the other hand, someone like Yan Shuhasan believes it's not yet an alliance, but likely to become one.
So potential future alliance.
Right. And then you have others, including Bobo Lo and Fiona Hill, who strongly argue it's not an alliance and unlikely to become one. They often point to their June 2019 communique that explicitly stated it wasn't.
And Putin himself was quite nuanced, wasn't he? Saying something like, we haven't set this goal, but we're not ruling it out either.
Exactly. And Foreign Minister Lavrov put an even finer point on it, suggesting their relationship is completely different from that of a traditional military alliance. Maybe in a certain sense, it is an even closer bond.
An even closer bond. That's fascinating phrasing. So given these wildly different takes, what's the most important thing we should understand about how they view their own relationship?
I think what it tells us is that labels can be misleading.
Right.
While it might not be a formal treaty-bound alliance like NATO, their level of coordination and mutual support, particularly since 2014, it far exceeds what we'd expect from just, strategic partners. Lavrov's comment about an even closer bond highlights this flexible, almost de facto alignment.
De facto alignment.
Yeah, it prioritizes shared geopolitical goals without the rigid commitments of a traditional alliance. It allows them to maintain a degree of deniability while still reaping the benefits of close cooperation.
That's a really crucial distinction. So how has this flexible de facto alignment played out, particularly in military and strategic cooperation? Especially overcoming that historical distrust we talked about earlier.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how that unfolded. Russia historically provided significant military aid to China after 1949, weapons systems, production facilities. Right.
But there was always a hesitation, a reluctance to transfer their most state-of-the-art technologies.
And that hesitation was largely due to lingering resentments over China's reverse engineering, right? Like developing their own jets based on Russian designs.
Exactly. Things like China developing its Shenyang J-11B fighter jet from licensed Su-27s. An intellectual property agreement in 2008 was an early step, but that fundamental distrust continued to exist until new incentives emerged after 2014.
And Ukraine played a role here too, unexpectedly.
It did, quite critically. Ukraine inherited a significant amount of Soviet-era military assets, and it played a surprisingly significant role in China's naval development.
How so?
Well, for example, it provided an unfinished Admiral Kuznetsov-class aircraft carrier hull. That became China's Liaoning.
The Liaoning, okay.
Yeah. And Ukrainian experts, reportedly including Valery Babich, allegedly consulted on carrier design. Ukraine also provided crucial training for Chinese carrier pilots at the NITKA facility in Crimea. But that connection got complicated recently, right? With Motorsich, the Ukrainian aerospace company.
Very complicated. China's attempted takeover was halted under U.S. pressure, which effectively moved Ukraine closer to the U.S. and NATO.
So what does that loss of access to Ukrainian military tech mean for Beijing's future naval ambitions? Does it slow them down?
Oh, it's a significant setback, no doubt. Motorsich produces crucial aircraft and helicopter engines, including those vital for naval aviation. Losing that direct access means China will have to redouble its efforts on domestic engine production or seek alternatives, which is, a slow and expensive process. It certainly impacts their timeline for developing a fully indigenous, high-performance carrier air wing.
Okay. So beyond Ukraine, what other military ties have deepened high-value acquisitions? Joint development.
Yes, definitely. Russia has supplied China with S-400 air defense systems. Although there were some hiccups as an honest shipment and espionage case involving an Arctic scientist, Valery Mitko, that apparently derailed some specific S-400 plans. But notably, China has deployed 2 S-400 units near the Indian border.
And there have been talks about Russia providing RD-180 rocket engines for China's space programs, which obviously have dual-use potential for ballistic missiles.
That's right. Discussions about those engines, and we've even seen a rocket-launched drone design study. So this isn't just about, selling finished products. It's about deeply intertwined military capabilities potentially being developed together.
That integration seems key. What about things like satellite navigation?
Also very telling, the significant dual-use aspects of their cooperation in global satellite navigation systems. Russia's GLONASS and China's Beidou are actively working towards compatibility.
And compatibility enables
potentially highly accurate precision strikes for both militaries. That's a profound strategic alignment, really.
Wow. Speaking of strategic alignment, let's talk about joint military exercises. Their frequency, geographic reach, the substance, it all seems to be increasing.
It really is. We've seen everything from naval maneuvers in the Yellow, East, and South China Seas to Russia's huge Vostok maneuvers, which saw significant Chinese participation back in 2018.
And that 2020 joint patrol by strategic bombers over the East China and Japan seas, that felt like a very clear signal.
It was. These exercises serve multiple functions. They project power, they demonstrate that neither country is isolated by U.S. efforts, and internally they affirm common threats and help both militaries, understand each other better, even if perfect tactical interoperability isn't always the primary goal.
What about the trilateral naval drills? They've done them with Iran in the Indian Ocean and Sea Oman, and with South Africa off the Cape of Good Hope. How do those raise the political stakes?
They raise the stakes by publicly demonstrating a broader coalition, one that challenges the traditional Western-led order. Including countries like Iran and South Africa indicates a willingness to engage non-traditional partners in strategic military cooperation. It sends a message that this isn't just a bilateral or regional thing, but an alignment with, perhaps, global ambitions.
This brings us to their parallel strategic postures, especially regarding Ukraine and Taiwan. It's hard not to see the similarities.
The parallels are striking. Russia's aggressive rhetoric regarding Ukraine's sovereignty and NATO aspirations, Putin even saying Ukraine could cease to exist as a state, finds a stark parallel in China's threat posture on Taiwan.
Right, Xi Jinping stating they make no promise to abandon the use of force, and those explicit threats to crush U.S. troops if present on the island. What's the deeper connection here?
Well, the connection seems to lie in a shared perception of maybe national destiny and historical grievance. Both see these territories as integral parts of their historical domains, with external powers, particularly the U.S., interfering. And importantly, you have to remember, China often tends to follow through on its warnings and threats. Think about the islets and reefs taken in the South China Sea.
That's a crucial point. And both countries also justify their support for authoritarian leaders elsewhere, right, like Assad, Maduro, Lukashenko.
Yes, they frame it as supporting heads of duly elected governments under threat of an externally instigated and organized coup.
But you could argue those justifications are more accurately described as, well, rationalizations of geopolitical and economic interests.
I think that's fair. We see Russia's military presence in places like Syria and Venezuela, while China's engagement is more economic, like its Belt and Road Initiative investments in Myanmar. Their actions consistently reflect a pursuit of national interests, just cloaked in the language of anti-interventionism.
Okay, let's shift slightly to nuclear deterrence and the INF Treaty. How do their official doctrines compare?
Well, officially, Russia's 2020 guidelines view nuclear weapons exclusively a means of deterrence and lists specific conditions for use. China's 2019 Defense White Paper reaffirms no first use, meaning they pledge not to use nukes unless attacked first.
Now, the demise of the INF Treaty, the one prohibiting land-based intermediate-range missiles, that could have created new tensions between them, couldn't it?
It could have, but instead, it seems to have become another source of cooperation. China adopted a pretty relaxed attitude towards Russia's missile deployments after the treaty ended, and both countries vowed to respond forcefully if the U.S. deployed similar INF-range missiles in Asia.
So how does that dynamic strengthen their bond?
It reinforces their strategic alignment against what they see as common external threats, primarily the U.S. The strong relationship allows, as one source put it, ample opportunity for Russia to explain its intentions to China. This fosters trust on really sensitive issues like missile deployment. Instead of suspicion, you get coordination, a shared front in what they perceive as an arms race. That's a powerful indicator of deepening strategic trust.
Okay, we've really dug into the military and strategic side. But how robust is this partnership when it comes to their economies? Does the strength we see in defense and geopolitics translate into equally deep economic ties?
Well, that's where the asymmetry becomes really strikingly clear.
Symmetry.
Yes. Putin himself acknowledged back in 2012 the colossal opportunities presented by China's growth. He aspired to, and I quote, catch the Chinese wind with the sails of our economy, which was an astonishing admission, really, of the asymmetry of economic development. Russia knows it's the junior economic partner here.
But despite that, Russia has made progress in reducing the dollar's share in its foreign trade, right? Particularly with China.
It has. The dollar's share in Russian exports to China fell significantly, down to around 35% by 2019 from almost all back in 2014. So that's a significant move towards de-dollarization for sure.
But where's the Chinese investment actually going in Russia?
That's the key. The underlying reality is that the bulk of Chinese investments in Russia remains heavily concentrated in fossil fuel projects. Things like Yamal LNG, Sibur, the Amur gas processing plant, projects often crucial for their development.
So it's resource-driven.
Largely. And despite Russia's highly touted pivot to the east, China has simply not been a meaningful substitution for the foreign direct investment, the FDI, that Russia lost due to Western sanctions after 2014.
Do we have figures on that?
Yeah. One example, Chinese and Hong Kong FDI in Russia was a mere $3.6 billion, or just 9% of Russia's total, in January 2019. What does that tell you about China's actual commitment to broadly bolstering Russia's economy?
It sounds like it's more about securing specific resources for China and less about providing a broad economic lifeline for Russia.
I think that's right. Plus, you have to remember, both countries still maintain stronger economic links with the European Union, the United States, and their allies than they do with each other.
Right.
And Chinese investors still face significant hurdles in Russia, corruption, red tape, and poor infrastructure. So the economic relationship, while it's growing, still has these fundamental limitations and this real unevenness.
That economic asymmetry is a constant undercurrent then. Does this extend to the technological front as well?
It does. Here, both China and Russia are, increasingly authoritarian and actively leveraging technology to control their own citizens.
Like surveillance tech.
Exactly. And importantly, they're also exporting these new surveillance methods globally. Russia's examples include things like mandatory pre-installed apps on devices, extensive biometric data collection.
And China's efforts are just on a massive scale, aren't they? Huge investments in CCTV, facial recognition, DNA sampling in places like Xinjiang, and that complex, somewhat opaque social credit system.
Which surprisingly seems to have a high degree of support among citizens, according to some studies. It's quite fragmented and opaque, though.
And both also jointly promote this idea of internet sovereignty, right? Opposing the free flow of information.
Yes, which leads to real concern about a potential splinternet, a fractured global internet where states have much more control.
How do their approaches to industrial policy and innovation compare? Because China seems way ahead there.
Oh, China's prowess is undeniable. Its innovation-driven development strategy, think Made in China 2025 and China Standards 2035, aims for global dominance in priority sectors like AI, robotics, aerospace.
And they actively foster national champions, Huawei, Baidu, Alibaba.
Right. And they export complete technological ecosystems. We're talking Chinese 5G, satellite systems, surveillance tech being adopted wholesale by countries like Thailand.
Russia, by contrast, seems to struggle more in this arena.
It does. While it has boosted AI R&D, there's a reported $26 billion budget and tax incentives, and it promotes digitization and smart cities. It struggles to truly leverage these fourth industrial revolution technologies.
Why that?
Mostly due to a lack of sufficient resources and a comparatively weak national R&D base. Its defense industry has even been ordered to increase civilian and dual-purpose products, which suggests a need for diversification and maybe leveraging existing strengths.
Okay, now a particularly sensitive area of dual-use scientific collaboration seems to be emerging in the Arctic.
Yes, that's definitely one to watch. The establishment of the Russian-Chinese Arctic Research Center in Moscow is a clear example. It's for joint expeditions, resource exploration, ecosystem monitoring.
And why is Arctic scientific collaboration critical for global security? What are the dual-use aspects?
Well, things like hydroacoustic sensors and fiber optic hydrophones, these have a massive impact for underwater target detection and national defense.
Submarine detection.
Exactly. And look at the Finnish-led Arctic Connect project. It's based on Huawei marine technology and could link Europe, Russia, and Asia with undersea fiber optic cables.
Okay, so faster internet, potentially. What's the dual impact?
Well, according to analysis, this project could simultaneously improve Chinese and Russian intelligence gathering and cyber defense capabilities, but also, crucially, enable acoustic detection of adversary submarines using distributed acoustic sensing, or DAS technology, embedded right in those cables.
So military advantage masked as civilian infrastructure.
Precisely.
This also creates huge dilemmas for Western tech companies, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Operating in China and Russia often requires adaptation to authoritarian practices. We've seen Google's retreat from China, instances of Apple, Google, and Telegram censoring smart voting apps in Russia, and the constant pressure over platforms like YouTube carrying channels like RT.
Is there a tech asymmetry here too, favoring China?
There is. There's a growing asymmetry of the technological partnership in China's favor. And this causes real Russian concerns about losing key talent to Chinese players and the persistent fear that China has the ability to steal foreign innovations.
So Russia wants to use domestic tech for 5G, for instance, even if it's not quite ready.
Exactly. It reinforces the idea that the rift between Russia and the West will inevitably drive Russia to adopt Chinese technology, even if they have reservations. It's also worth briefly mentioning rare earths critical for tech. China dominates production. Russia has significant reserves but low output. Another potential area of future, maybe complicated, collaboration.
Okay, let's broaden out again. Beyond the UN Security Council, where they often vote together, how else are Russia and China flexing their muscles together on the global stage? What about other multilateral forums?
They're highly active, yeah. Particularly in Geneva, places like the UN Human Rights Council, UNHRC, the World Health Organization, WHO, the World Trade Organization, WTO, and also standard development organizations, SDOs, like the International Telecommunication Union, ITU.
And they present a united front there.
Remarkably so. They consistently dismiss criticism.
Can you give us some concrete examples of that?
Sure. They voted identically in all 15 contentious UNHRC votes back in February-March 2021. They successfully pushed for a resolution criticizing sanctions. They consistently defend the abysmal human rights records of authoritarian states, think Syria, Saudi Arabia, Belarus.
In
return, these countries often initiate joint statements that dismiss criticism toward China. It's a kind of reciprocal defense pact within these bodies. China is particularly proactive in trying to shape and promote a different narrative on human rights.
While Russia's efforts are less visible.
Less visible, perhaps, or framed differently, often using innocuous terms such as information security to disguise more controversial practices related to surveillance or censorship.
So they're coordinating to challenge established norms, particularly around human rights and internet governance.
Absolutely. They actively promote the sovereignty principle in internet governance. They oppose the free flow of information, and they even jointly drafted the International Code of Conduct for Information Security back in 2015. Which essentially aims to give states much more control over their national internet segments.
And China consistently works to isolate Taiwan in these forums, too.
Yes, constantly attempting to consolidate the international isolation of Taiwan. They successfully blocked its observer status in the World Health Assembly, for instance. It's a key part of pushing their one China policy on the global stage.
So on the surface, it looks like a really powerful, coordinated bloc in these forums. But are there limitations? Do they ever fail?
Oh, definitely. Despite this seemingly united front, the so-called autocratic alliance often finds itself on the losing side in places like the UNHRC. China even had to pull a resolution in 2020 when it became clear it lacked sufficient votes, so their influence isn't absolute.
Interesting. And they prefer bilateral deals sometimes.
They show a strong preference for bilateral support, yes. We saw this clearly with their vaccine diplomacy during the pandemic. They largely bypassed multilateral initiatives like the ACT Accelerator or COVAX.
Why do that?
Well, it allows them to target and reward reliable allies. It's arguably more of a transactional approach than a deep commitment to broad multilateralism.
And Russia's own growing isolation in some forums, like leaving the UNHRC in 2022.
Yeah.
How does that affect the dynamic?
It likely serves to further contribute to strengthen China's leadership role in the autocratic alliance. So paradoxically, Russia's increasing isolation could make China the even more dominant partner within this bloc.
That's a very astute observation. Okay, so this complex relationship, deep military ties, economic and tech asymmetries, multilateral maneuvering, it poses a significant challenge for the West, doesn't it?
Huge challenge. From the U.S. perspective, China is increasingly seen as the pacing threat, the long-term comprehensive competitor, while Russia is perhaps viewed as a more straightforward challenge, primarily military, but also capable of leveraging its energy supply to Europe.
And Russia's military modernization, exercises like Zapad 2021, they're not just about capability, are they?
No, they serve as both an impressive show of force and, frankly, a psychological operation to assert military power, including demonstrating its full control over Belarusian armed forces in that case.
And the U.S. military is already described as Overstretched.
That's the assessment.
Yeah.
Structured historically to fight maybe one major and one secondary campaign, but now facing two near-peer competitors and two theaters of great power confrontation, one in Europe, the other in the Indo-Pacific.
Which has serious implications for NATO and Europe.
It absolutely does. If U.S. resources are increasingly pulled towards Asia, then for deterrence in Europe to hold, European allies must assume the burden. The U.S. clearly expects burden shifting from Europe, particularly Germany, despite what some perceive as an unwillingness to keep its pledges.
So Europe's security ultimately depends on?
Depends first and foremost on the USA and next on Germany, according to the analysis we're drawing from.
And if that de facto military alliance between Russia and China were to ever become more formal, what would that mean for NATO operationally?
It would likely mean reduced effectiveness of defense operations for NATO. Think fewer available U.S. land forces in Europe, questions about rapid reinforcements, potentially challenged air superiority in a major conflict. It would also make it easier to discourage and deter the launch of NATO counterattacks by presenting this truly formidable, coordinated front across two massive theaters.
Let's zoom in briefly on Central and Eastern Europe. Despite a lot of Western alarm bells, is it fair to say the region is largely a backwater for actual Sino-Russian engagement?
That seems to be the assessment in some of the source material, yes. It's considered highly unlikely that China would come to Russia's aid in a crisis in Europe or Russia to China's in Asia. It sounds more like a partnership without substance, specifically in that region.
But there's some interesting case studies there, like Serbia.
Serbia is fascinating. It performs this complex balancing act. It gets Chinese infrastructure investment, the Pupin Bridge, a coal plant, and arms sales, including drones and that FK-3 missile system from China.
Yet it also gets U.S. military hardware.
Yes, it's the largest recipient of U.S. military hardware in the region. Meanwhile, Russia supplies military equipment like MiG-29s and tanks and operates that controversial humanitarian emergencies facility in Nisha, which many believe is actually an espionage base.
In Hungary, another complex case.
Very much so. You have Chinese economic influence via Huawei and plans for a Fudan University campus, and deep Russian ties through the Rosatom nuclear plant project and the International Investment Bank, also believed by some to be an espionage cover. Yet, despite all this, Hungary remains a member of the EU and NATO.
And even Ukraine, before the full-scale invasion, had growing ties with China.
It did. China became Ukraine's leading trade partner. And Kyiv even shifted from backing U.S. criticism of China at the UNHRC to signing trade deals. President Zelensky had a notably friendly phone call with Xi Jinping at one point. It just shows how pragmatic economic interests can sometimes, well, override clear geopolitical alignments.
Okay, so given all of this complexity, the military deepening, the economic asymmetry, the multilateral cooperation, these regional nuances, what are the most effective strategies for the West? How should they respond?
Well, one strong proposal that comes up is hard decoupling.
Decoupling supply chains.
Essentially, yes. A strategic decision taken across the transatlantic community to disentangle our supply chains from China, particularly in critical sectors.
Oh.
There's also the vital need to counter the normative shifts, the possibility of China and Russia shaping global values and technical standards, especially in areas like IT and human rights, that could have a really detrimental effect for businesses and for democratic societies globally.
So push back in those multilateral forums.
Exactly. And that requires Western nations to act more quickly, be more strategic, and coordinate better on things like personnel policies in these organizations. Building alliances with the African group, Latin American countries, Southeast Asian nations is also seen as crucial to counter Sino-Russian influence in these global forums.
And the overall approach, confrontation or something else?
The recommendation is generally nuance over confrontation. Integrating all the complex elements we've discussed, avoiding painting a black and white picture. The idea is that this prevents deepening existing grievances and fosters more effective, targeted responses, rather than broad, sweeping condemnations that might miss the internal contradictions within the Russia-China relationship itself.
Right. And that brings us towards the end of this deep dive. We've explored the really intricate, often contradictory nature of Russia and China's deepening strategic cooperation. It's a relationship fueled by shared opposition to the existing international order, yet, as we've seen, often marked by underlying asymmetries and that historical distrust.
Absolutely. While their military and technological collaboration intensifies, their economic ties remain surprisingly uneven. And their multilateral efforts, while coordinated, sometimes fall short of being a truly unified, always successful front.
So for you, our listener, the learner and observer of global affairs, here's something to think about. In what unexpected ways might the internal pressures and inherent imbalances within this growing partnership, the economic asymmetry, the tech gap, the differing regional priorities, ultimately present unforeseen opportunities or vulnerabilities for the rest of the world? And how might recognizing where their cooperation is more substance versus show truly inform your understanding of the geopolitical chessboard going forward?